At the beginning of the film, we're introduced to the main character, Yuri Orlov, who emigrated to the United States from Ukraine with his parents. Like most former citizens of the Soviet Union, they settled in Brighton Beach. There, his father opened a small restaurant, having claimed Jewish ancestry beforehand to make it easier to leave the USSR, and from then on became a regular at the local synagogues. Yuri himself spent a long time unable to find his place in life. Working at the family restaurant weighed on him, and he saw no future in it. Then one day, becoming an accidental witness to a shootout between gangsters, he suddenly realizes exactly what he wants to do. He asks his father to introduce him to Eli Kurtz, a man who can get hold of weapons, and soon receives his first shipment of Uzi submachine guns to sell. Despite his lack of experience, Yuri manages to pull off his first deal, and, having gotten a taste for this new line of work, he offers his brother, who works in the kitchen, a chance to become his partner. Vitaly, a pacifist, wants nothing to do with dealing in death, but Yuri talks him into it anyway. He's already drawn an important conclusion. America is full of crime, but it has even more legal weapons, and the real money is wherever wars are being fought. All that's left is to expand his network of connections. Together with Vitaly, he heads to the 1983 Berlin Arms Fair, where he tries to make some contacts. There he finds a man and pitches him his business proposal.
I don't take sides.
But in the Iran-Iraq war, you sold guns to both sides.
But the man doesn't take the newcomers seriously, figuring Yuri is operating at an amateur level while he himself handles deals capable of toppling governments. Still, they don't waste their time at the conference and manage to enjoy some of the local color. That's when Yuri realized his true calling, dealing arms outside the law. He had his first major success in Lebanon, where he managed to sell several tons of American weapons. Yes, tons. There were so many weapons that they were sold by weight. The U.S. Army often left them behind since transporting them cost more than producing them. Naturally, American officers like Colonel Southern were in on it, and they had to be cut in on the profits.
I sold Israeli-made Uzis to Muslims.
Little by little, Yuri's business took off. He supplied weapons to countries in Africa and the Middle East, never giving a thought to the moral side of things, and always guided by business interests. Given the nature of his work, Yuri often had to outwit intelligence agencies, and bribed intelligence officers helped him do it, tipping him off in advance about planned raids. Thanks to this, he came out clean time and time again. This time, too, receiving word of an upcoming inspection, Yuri orders the ship's name changed while it's still out at sea, and the flag swapped out as well.
Kono, how do you spell that? K-O-N-O. Okay, well that's good. Kono. K-O-N-O.
The arriving Interpol agents, led by Jack Valentine, find only containers of rotting potatoes, beneath which sit crates of weapons. Once, as payment for goods, the brothers received 6 bricks of happy powder, which could be sold for more. But Vitaly had his own plans for the powder. They only managed to track him down 12 days later in Bolivia, by which point his brother has already run a significant amount of product through himself. After barely convincing him to return to the U.S., Yuri places his brother in a rehab center, hoping to save him from his addiction. Just like Vitaly, Yuri had an addiction of his own, the fashion model Ava Fontaine. Wherever he was, he kept seeing her photograph, and one day he spends $30,000 on a fake photo shoot and the rental of an expensive hotel in the Caribbean. Of course, there was no photographer, but it was enough to get to know her better. Pretending not to recognize her, Yuri introduces himself as a businessman and makes an impression by offering to give her a lift to Miami on a private jet. Once they're in the air, he acts as if he's only just now recognized the famous model. Yet Ava had no idea that the plane, the car, and even the suit were all merely rented. Soon Yuri and Ava get married, and during the celebration she admits she suspects he has his secrets, but asks only one thing of him: never to put their happiness at risk. To give his family a beautiful, carefree life, Yuri has to go into debt and cover it with new loans. But the news of the Soviet Union's collapse changes everything.
It's over!
He decides to head to Ukraine, seeing new opportunities in what's happening. By that point, Vitaly still hasn't managed to beat his addictions, and Yuri once again has to send his brother to rehab. After the collapse of the USSR, an enormous quantity of weapons is left behind in Ukraine, and one of the military units is commanded by Yuri's uncle, General Volkov. Hearing the proposal, he initially refuses to sell off the weaponry, but Yuri convinces him that as long as the country has no new leadership in place, an operation like this can be pulled off without risk, and no one will be able to punish him. In the end, Volkov brings in the top brass, who take their cut, and soon the weapons that had been stockpiled for years for a possible war with the States are all sold off. The trip ends in a colossal deal for Yuri. He acquires 30,000 Kalashnikov rifles and an entire squadron of modern helicopters. But Yuri wasn't the only one to spot the opportunities that had opened up. Simeon Weiss also decided to cash in on the former Union's weapons. But he was too late. Having grown rich during the Cold War, he suddenly found himself out of the game, while Yuri had managed to seize the key supply sources. Weiss proposes working together, but this time, it's he who gets turned down. When arms dealers go to war, the ammunition never runs out. Still, not everything went as smoothly as he would have liked. Jack Valentine keeps hunting Yuri, and this time tracks him down in Ukraine during one of his shipments. But the arms dealer manages to strip the military equipment off the helicopters and argue that the aircraft are being sent to Burkina Faso for a humanitarian mission. Under the law, transporting weapons and aircraft separately doesn't violate Interpol's regulations. So, Valentine has no formal grounds for an arrest. Jack was one of those officials who blindly followed the letter of the law, and after warning Yuri that he'll catch up with him sooner or later, he backs off. But Yuri had crossed too many people, and General Volkov refuses to do business even with those willing to pay more than his relative. And one day, Yuri gives his uncle a car, which explodes right before his eyes. But Volkov's death doesn't bring the trade to a halt. The weapons from the Soviet stockpiles keep spreading across the world, and they become especially sought after in Africa, where the conflicts never die down. For Yuri, the main client becomes the president of Liberia, André Baptiste, a brutal dictator famous for dealing with anyone who displeased him, which is why Yuri always tried to avoid meeting him. But one day Baptiste's son makes it clear that his father wants to meet in person. During a demonstration of a revolver, André kills a bodyguard who'd been neglecting his duties, which outrages Yuri. But, remembering where he is, he pulls himself together. He tells him he's obligated to buy this revolver, thereby showing that human life means nothing to him either. The dictator likes this approach, and although Yuri was wary of him, he was even more frightened by André Jr., a man famous for eating the hearts of his enemies. Yuri is brought to an old hotel, where he's greeted by two attractive women.
I
would be happy to make you happy.
Baptiste was convinced that even children should hold weapons in their hands, but the country was short on money. Instead of cash, he offered to pay in timber or in stone, or, more precisely, in diamonds. Yuri tells the president to wait a week, and then he'll bring him armored personnel carriers in exchange for the diamonds. By the late 90s, he'd grown so rich that he could even afford to be a patron of the arts, anonymously buying up his wife's work in an effort to support and please her. Vitaly, on the other hand, refuses to change and never finds anything that truly engages him. He keeps condemning his brother for the methods he uses to make money, and is amazed that Ava never asks any questions about the source of the money that's practically pouring in. As the business grows, the authorities pay more and more attention to Yuri. One day, while riding in his car, he notices a helicopter watching him. He asks the driver to turn into a tunnel to lose it. When he hides one of Ava's paintings in his hideout, she calls and tells him someone is rummaging through their trash. It's Jack Valentine, who finds a few interesting leads. Yuri asks his wife not to worry and assures her that everything is under control. By this point, he's reached such a scale that he already owns several planes, which he uses to supply weapons all across Africa. During one of these flights, an Interpol plane orders the pilot to land, and Yuri calls Colonel Southern, who refuses to intervene, citing an extremely inconvenient moment. A warning burst from the fighter jet's onboard weapons forces the pilot to obey the order and set a course for the nearest airport. But Yuri realizes that, in that case, they're all facing prison, and he convinces Alexei to land the plane right on a highway. With enormous difficulty, the pilot manages to bring the aircraft down onto a dirt road. To get out of his hopeless situation, Yuri starts handing out weapons to the local residents, asking them to call over everyone they know. This unheard-of spectacle of generosity draws more and more people, and soon the entire cargo has been carried off. Naturally, when Agent Valentine arrives, he finds no evidence. He calls Yuri a real killer, believing that selling weapons to people who kill each other is no different from taking part in their deaths directly. In response, the arms dealer states that he never puts a gun to anyone's head. Yuri admits that a war with plenty of shooting is good for business, but adds that he'd prefer it if people missed more often. Despite the lack of evidence, Valentine informs him that by law, he has the right to detain Yuri for 24 hours, and, leaving him next to the plane along with a pair of handcuffs, drives off. Over those 24 hours, the local residents pick the plane clean down to the frame, and when Valentine returns, he finds Yuri still in the same spot. Later, back in his hotel room, Yuri runs into André Baptiste, who proposes that he take out Weiss for trying to supply weapons to his rivals. André reminds Yuri that it was Weiss who once arranged his uncle's murder, but Yuri refuses to take part in it directly. So, Baptiste declares that Yuri can stop everything from happening simply by saying the word stop. But Yuri stays silent and, without formally becoming the one who initiated the killing, effectively allows his competitor to be eliminated. While Yuri is away, Agent Valentine approaches Ava for help, but she refuses to believe that her husband deals in weapons and asks the agents to leave the house. And yet, this visit doesn't go without consequences. Returning home after another trip, Yuri finds Ava naked. She refuses to wear clothing and jewelry stained with blood. Ava begs him to stop dealing in death, but Yuri is certain it won't change anything. If he leaves, someone else will take his place, and there won't be any fewer weapons. Besides, he considers it his calling and the thing he does best. Still, for Ava's sake, Yuri gives up the arms business for 6 months. He switches to trading in oil and timber, which genuinely surprises Valentine, who continues to bug his rooms, not believing that Yuri has really changed. And as it turns out, he was right. One day, André Baptiste pays Yuri a visit right at his home. He notes with regret that the Lord of War has retired, but then offers him a diamond so large that Yuri simply can't find it in himself to refuse. Suspecting something is off, Ava decides to follow her husband when he tells her he's going on a business trip. Entering the code on the lock made up of their son's date of birth, she discovers what the authorities would later call a museum of murder. Meanwhile, Yuri turns to his brother for the first time in a long while, a brother who seemed to have finally settled down and gotten his act together. Because he's been gone so long, a lot has changed in Africa, and Yuri needs someone who can watch his back, and Vitali agrees. In Liberia, they're met by André himself, who thanks Yuri and sends the weapons to Sierra Leone, where he'll receive payment for his work. André Jr. goes along with the brothers to oversee the delivery. Upon arriving, Vitali witnesses a brutal scene that makes him beg his brother to back out of the deal.
It's not our business.
But Yuri is certain there's no way to help these people, and they'll be killed anyway. And if they back out of the deal, they'll be treated the same way. Vitali agrees with him and admits that for a moment he forgot where they were and who they were dealing with. However, once he's made sure that Yuri has gone back to the deal, he pulls out grenades and slowly sets them down. In response, André Jr. hits him with a crowbar, and Vitali throws a grenade into the truck full of weapons. He tries to make it to the second truck, but a burst from an automatic rifle catches up to him and kills him on the spot. Yuri walks over to him and takes 2 grenades. Realizing there's nothing more he can do to change anything, he forces himself to return to the negotiations and accepts payment for only half the goods. After the deal is done, just as Vitali predicted, the entire camp is wiped out. And that very same week, the massacre repeats in other parts of Sierra Leone, finally convincing Yuri that it's impossible to stop as long as weapons exist in the world. He pays a doctor in Monrovia $20 to remove all the lead from his brother's body and draw up a fake death certificate. But a bullet lodged under Vitali's ribs leads to Yuri being detained at the airport. He calls his wife, but Ava has decided to leave him, and his grief-stricken mother declares that to her, both her sons are dead. A triumphant Agent Valentine reveals that the arrest was made possible by the forged death certificate, which states that Vitaly died of a heart attack. To finish, Jack shows Yuri a newspaper that's run an article about his ties to dictators all over the world. Valentine doesn't hide his delight, because now Yuri faces life in prison, but he can't understand why the man stays so calm. So, Yuri explains the reason for his indifference. He's certain that very soon there will be a knock at the door, and outside, waiting for Jack, will be a man who will thank him for the work he's done and, despite all his protests, order the detainee released at once. It's all because the world's biggest arms dealer is the President of the United States, and sometimes he simply can't officially supply weapons to certain countries. In moments like those, people like Yuri step in, the ones who sell weapons to America's enemies, ties to whom are too dangerous for the federal authorities. Sometimes it's inconvenient for the president to leave his fingerprints on the weapons, and so the dirty work is done by middlemen. Jack may consider him evil, but he's a necessary evil, and the moment he finishes his speech, there's a knock at the door. Just as he predicted, Yuri walks out of the agency accompanied by an officer who wishes him continued success. And soon, he goes back to the thing he does best, selling weapons wherever big-time politics demands it. Jack Valentine always considered Yuri Orlov evil, a man who profited off the deaths of others. But in the end, he understood that, to the powerful of this world, the lives of ordinary people are just statistics, and wars are a convenient instrument of politics. Yuri wasn't the source of that evil, only a reflection of it, a cog in a system where men like him can always be replaced. And as long as decisions in this world are made far from the battlefields, weapons will always find their seller and wars their victims.